worked for him. Yes, I was a politically commissioned officer.
That's kind of, I don't know, that's amazing.
So I tweeted out, it got no life. It got no life. And I know that's something that my followers and viewers care about.
Private part punch Mitt Romney and burn this mother effer down.
Oh, yeah, you know, It makes me furious.
And where it should have stopped is at the deal standpoint, where they thought about it. Bad deal, should have never been thought of.
Exactly.
Right.
Have you thought about that?
Yes.
Wow. That's kind of, I don't know,
And they had the worst cover-up ever.
Earlier at the Assembly, the French Parliament, leading politicians from all parties arrived for a motion of censure against the government. Monsieur Pompidou, the Prime Minister, spoke convincingly against the motion. He won by a majority of 11 votes. But the dispute was gaining ground in the streets. Even before it had reached this stage, the government had set up urgent talks to control the conflict. It was too late. That night, the Latin Quarter of Paris became a battleground. The Prime Minister and leading government members desperately tried to stem the flood of dissent, but it was no use. Despite appeals for discipline and calm from less militant demonstrating leaders, big trouble was looming. The mob was incensed by the sight of riot police. Sanity and social responsibility were forgotten. During this dramatic night of bloodshed and terror, there were similar scenes in many centres of provincial France. Workers were already talking of victory, but still General de Gaulle remained silent. On the French-German border, more than 500 students from both countries waited for left-wing student leader Daniel Cohn-Bendit. Red Danny, as he is known, had been expelled from France. He refused to acknowledge his expulsion and told his supporters, "My expulsion will not solve the problems of France. I will come back." Red Danny was eventually escorted out of France. On the day that General de Gaulle at last agreed to address the nation, members of trade union movements marched peacefully and with order through the streets of the capital. Could the general, president of the French Republic, solve his country's turmoil? He said he recognized the necessity for social changes and promised there would be reform. But he emphasized there must be law and order. The country must come first. In so many words, he said the strikes must end. Negotiations must begin quickly to get France moving once more. His speech ended, long live France. It was a typically stirring speech, but it failed. The unrest and violence had spread rapidly. In Paris, it was a night of wild disorder. The Latin Quarter was rocked with a violence such as it had never known before.
To the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist and camera operator David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere in the ever-expanding TMBS universe. On today's program, returning crew Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone magazine and plenty of other legendary pieces of journalism joins us. We're talking about the Draft Bernie movement. What can fix Facebook, this little, actually massive, pernicious engine of fascism in our global landscape? Plus, Julian Assange, in my opinion, is trash. The case against him has implications for the free speech of all of us. We're talking about that. In a global update, 2 leaders of the Landless Movement in Mexico have been assassinated as Brazil's new environment minister calls fines ideological. And local elections see strong results for the Congress Party in India, perhaps a rebuke of Modi's fascism. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan looking to make a grand bargain in South Asia with the Indian government. Plus, shout out to Lula and a whole bunch more to get to in the post game. We are ready to go. But let's start with the yellow vest protests, which have gripped global consciousness for at least a week now. The massive street demonstrations across France, which started with a focus on the government, the Macron government's punitive and austerity, top-down driven approach to implementing a gas tax, an increase in petrol gases. The rise in the streets have quickly grown and expanded in terms of demands and causes. And they've led up to this moment, which is Emmanuel Macron's partial back down as of last night. This is a clip of Macron. It's subtitles for those watching on YouTube, and I'm gonna read or speak over it rather, what he said for those listening on podcast. It was at first an anger against attacks, and the Prime Minister responded by canceling and removing all increases scheduled to start for the next year. But this anger is deeper. I feel it is justified in many ways. It is 40 years of malaise that is resurfacing. Malaise of workers that can no longer find places for themselves. Malaise of territories, neighborhoods, villages. And we will see public services diminish, an environment that is disappearing. Democratic malaise where the sentiment is not being heard is growing. Malaise in the society in the face of changes in our society, a secularism that has been disturbed. and up against a way of life that creates barriers and distance. It was a long time coming. It's here now. No doubt, over the past year and a half, we have not provided answers. I take my share of responsibility. And I may have given the impression that I did not care about that I have had other priorities. I know that I have hurt some of you with my words. Many other countries are struggling through bad times.
Sorry if you offended.
Sorry that you feel bad, but I believe we can find a way out of this together. I want this for France because it's been our mission throughout history to launch a path that has never been explored. For us and for the world, we will respond to this economic and social urgency with strong measures, by cutting taxes more rapidly, by keeping our spending under control but not with U-turns. We want France where one can live in dignity through one's work, and on this point we have gone too slowly. I want to intervene quickly and concretely on this issue. I ask the government and parliament to do what is necessary so we can live better in his work so one can live better on his work salary from the beginning of next year. The salary of minimum wage worker will increase by 100 euros this month, starting in 2019, with no extra cost to employers. For those who get less than 2,000 euros each month, starting in 2019, we will cancel Social Security tax hike passed this past year. The effort we asked for was too big, and it was not fair. So these are Macron's words. You could see there he's conflating a lot there. He's conflating some of the xenophobia that has spiked in France due to immigration. He's conflating in the rhetoric of a 40-year problem. He's still taking aim at the French social model. And along with that, he refused some of the demands of protesters to reinstate a wealth tax, which of course not only needs to happen, but needs to be radically expanded as we seize oligarch money to invest in the future, to cause to address the problems that things like this gas tax were really supposed to address theoretically. And let's get specifically into that. In France, 80% of fuel is diesel. In just the past year, the price of diesel has risen by 23%. Macron's plan on the increase of diesel sparked widespread protest, and the Yellow Vest movement comes from a French law that requires every vehicle owner to purchase a yellow vest. American liberals were quick to attack the protests and leftist support for them and back Macron's regressive policies by suggesting that it was an anti-environmental movement, one opposed to dealing with the demands of changing our energy economy and dealing with the climate crisis. And I won't even give them credit for being half right. They're less than a fourth right. They are entirely missing the reality that this punitive measure to punish everyday workers, when the real foundations of the climate crisis are in a consumeristic capital economy, driven by capital, driven by oligarchies and energy cartels that warp policy, take money out of people's pockets, and damage the public good. The only way to address this is by nationalizing oil companies, mass redistribution of wealth, and extremely high taxation for the wealthy. And it's why one of the major demands of the movement has been the reintroduction of the tax on the wealthiest French people, something Macron repealed and has still not backed down on, you notice in that speech. Much of the activity of the Yellow Vest movement has occurred in areas between the rural and urban communities. For those, there is little choice but to drive a car. The tax is overwhelmingly would have been on the backs of those who could least afford it. The flames were only stoked when the debates in the 2019 finance law revealed that more than 500 million euros from the fuel tax will go not to ecological transition, but to cover the deficit of the 2019 budget as a result of the abolition of the wealth tax, literal redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top. The protest movement has contested this important terrain, and we will see more and more in years to come of who should pay for the destruction of our environment. Well, we say the industries and interests that cause that destruction, not the people living inside that context. The movement has, of course, rapidly expanded and now includes public sector workers, students, small business employees, shop owners, and artisans, and a host of precarious workers and long-term unemployed, in addition to a proliferation of women taking the lead. It's important to note that though this is a protest against austerity, it has not taken place in the workplace, and it requires a more careful analysis of its goals. There have been a variety of sentiments and strategies deployed in these protests, and people on both sides of the political divide have tried to make it theirs. The fascist forces of Marine Le Pen and the National Front have tried to make it their own. Mélenchon and the left have embraced it and tried to make it their own. But instead, what we see is a proliferation of organic uprisings across the country demanding very good things, but also attracting all sectors of politics, including fascists. That's why we have, we've seen in certain areas chants break out that are racist, homophobic, xenophobic, and sexist in nature. We've seen the efforts of the National Front to woo the movement and try to make it part of their own fascist movement. The Italian example is very cautionary, where similar protests had taken place in Italy and were capitalized by the Northern League without a strong leftward presence and, of course, a center not able to properly respond to these demands and, in fact, creating these demands. So the task of the left is to go into this contested space, recognize the absolutely correct sentiments there, but not have a sort of mystical belief in the power of crowds. Crowds draw everybody, and movements draw a vast amount of people, things, and ideologies. It's a contested space. The sentiment, the anger, the movement is right. But we can never allow it to be defined on fascist terms. Macron's minor concessions should not halt the movement that has already been able to seriously challenge the government. It's unclear what will come of this movement, but it has radical potential to create a new political formation that challenges the tired politics represented by Macron. That's right. Macron's 1990s AOL politics might be the sort of cause célèbre and de jour of delusional, disconnected centrist types. But in the real world, this type of politics is already aged out and done, even as it has a late and disastrous arrival in France. The continued fight will define the next phase of the ecological movement. Will it accept its responsibility to the planet, or will it use an outsized political power to try to make the poor pay for the greed and abuse of the rich? In conclusion, we want to play a few scenes here from these protests because we have discovered the only red-brown alliance that this show can ever get behind. And for those of you watching, this is a tractor trailer, farm equipment, spraying manure on a government building in Paris. The type of red-brown alliance that we can believe in. Cutting away, we have another one we're going to play. And this one deployed against a police barricade.
This is the kind of protest we need at Tucker Carlson's house.
Matt means that satirically.
Yeah, exactly. Satire.
Yeah. It's fucking satire. Why is everybody snowflakes all of a sudden? No.
Unless you're gonna do it. There you go. Good job. Good job,
brilliant.
France.
Good job, France. Good job.
I mean, and they got some results too.
They got some results, and they got to keep going. But notice, I mean, very important to watch Macron. He's a savvy operator there. And his conflating of the issues of xenophobia and social inclusion, and his broader, like, it has been happening for 40 years, as a way to still reinforce his neoliberal plans to destroy the French social model. So watch carefully, stay on the streets, and make sure, because there's no doubt. I mean, Macron is massively unpopular, and he's almost certainly not going to win re-election and have a durable political project. We need to make sure that the fallout of that is to the left and not a fascist government in the European core.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that a lot of times the left has been so impotent for so long that they forgot the proper role of leftist organizations in these kind of movements. I mean, throughout history there have been revolts and rebellions after something bad happens. But what the powerful role of the left is to arm those movements with theory to understand why they're feeling pain. And what happens when the left is absent from those spaces, the right is very happy to redirect those energies, toward the demonization of immigrants, Jewish people, minorities, women, etc. And it's something that the left really needs to be much bolder in, is trying to work out these contradictions. As we're talking about, this is a movement that is not, a cohesive group of people. Right? So that means that you have to work to create that kind of unity, to create that force, to create that subject that can actually create the progressive left-wing future that we want to come out of this. But just, reacting positively to a revolt just because it happens is really missing the point, especially the point for Marxists. I mean, that's literally why Karl Marx wrote a manifesto, right? Was to try to tell people, hey, there's something that's going on. It's upsetting you. You feel very poor. And here's why it's happening. And here's what we can do about it. And we really need to, reclaim that space and that role on the left.
I'm so sorry that all of you feel bad. My bad. He did a kind of like, I'm so sorry if you are offended.
Oh, and the liberal...
Apparently people's feelings have been hurt that I am increasing poverty. And so I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings.
There was a hilarious op-ed in the Financial Times today. The title was like, what's happening in France is just a reminder that it is impossible to be the president of France. Because there's too many, because you have to have low taxes and have good social programs, and you can't have both.
France has plenty of oligarchs that need to reinvest their money inside their country. Just like everywhere else. And the Financial Times has been on a roll with this. I mean, when you look at the world today, obviously AMLO is a much bigger threat than Bolsonaro. Oh, really? I mean, the Financial Times, like if you read the financial press, there was a long time where the Financial Times had a lot more plausible deniability than the Wall Street Journal. And conditions are really coming together in such a way that the financial press, fuck it, fascism.
Well, it's just
that's just embarrassing. Bolsonaro is a less of a threat than AMLO. I mean,
it's just showing the the class tendencies and the class opinions of a certain group of people. They have really good reporters, though, and wonderful.
They do.
Wonderful
Financial Times. Everybody should read the.
So does the Wall Street Journal, for that matter. Maybe fewer of them, but I know a few.
No, Wall Street Journal. I mean,
it's
all
depressing.
Of these places you can still somewhat disaggregate their editorial. I guess my point is that the Financial Times actually would sometimes have good editorial. They had like the Keynesian elites. They had I just read this new IMF study, and actually maybe we should. They're
more Krugman friendly.
They're more Krugman friendly. More democracy is asset protection for the rich kind of writing.
Well, I mean, we'll just see how thin that alliance that was made between the ostensible socialist and left parties that basically became centrist neoliberal parties and the financial class as they sort of flock already to right-wing, far-right nationalist demagogues and demonize the left. So all those reasonable opinions, right, just go away very quickly when your bottom line is threatened a little bit, or we start talking about maybe redistributing some of the incredible amounts of wealth that have been appropriated in the past 20, 30 years.
No doubt. And also why don't believe for a second any of these fascist propagandists like Steve Bannon that any of these right-wing ideologues are going to do anything to address the occasional problems that they accurately diagnose. I mean, you look at like Orban in Hungary, they literally have legislation now to keep people from sort of working beyond their hourly wage. I mean, that's like a next step. I mean, that's beyond austerity. That is literal neo-feudalism. So that's what we have in store from these fascist governments. And the centrists will break that way because they know they aren't a threat to capital, and the fascists will use real problems and misdirect it to bigotry and xenophobia, and then actually implement a policy that's even more oligarch-friendly than what came before. All right, yeah, let's do this. Let's go to the Shoutout. Give me
Let's get to Shoutout. Creepy. Shoutout. Weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible. Shoutout. This is crazy. Shoutout. This is out of control. Shoutout. That's creepy. Shoutout. That's weird. Creepy. Weird. Crazy. This is crazy. Shoutout.
I love that beat. Who's the guy he's sampling in it again?
AJ, Alex Jones.
Oh yeah, I don't recall that guy.
Yeah,
I haven't heard from him in a while. He
Has
used
been
to
a
have
while.
some type of YouTube show or something?
Apparently, he was at the hearings today.
I bet he was. All right, today's shout out goes to the world's most prominent political prisoner, Lula da Silva. We obviously have been following this case for quite some time. And as I mentioned, I think last week, now over 22 people have been released in charges related to Lava Jato, which was, of course, the sprawling corruption case, which was weaponized to target and delegitimize the Workers' Party. There was a hearing in the Supreme Court on releasing Lula last week, which was delayed indefinitely. And it's common practice in Brazil, as an example. I mean, there's people who have been released on similar charges, and also for people, let alone a highly respected ex-two-term president, and still in many arguably, I mean, certainly I think he would have defeated Bolsonaro. He always led him by double digits in the polls. There's people who do not have records like this and have been serving violent crime sentences, who get released from prison to do home sentences, as an example. So, and this is a letter that was released that Lula wrote to the mine workers union on December 10th to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And the headline from it is, "I will not trade my dignity for freedom." And I'm just going to read a little bit from the piece. We have it up on screen from the site Brazil Wire, our friend Brian Mayer over there. He starts, I'll read it from this, but we can keep it up on screen. "My friends, this is a very special day for humanity. 70 years ago, the UN ratified a declaration inspired by solidarity and respect for others and recognizing differences based on the right of freedom and the search for peace and understanding between men, women, and nations. Today is a day to celebrate for how far we've advanced and since then towards implementing these rights. It's a day to remember the heroes of this struggle on all fronts. Martin Luther King, who was sacrificed in defense of civil rights. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years incarcerated by the apartheid regime. Mahatma Gandhi, who even before the Declaration of Human Rights was transforming nonviolence into the strongest resistance against the colonial regime, and so many others who fought for a better world. Here in Brazil, we've had an opportunity to put many of the declarations into practice, such as the freedom of organizing and expression, the end of censorship, the recognition of rights of women and the GLBT people. We started the repatriation of centuries-long debt with Afro-Brazilians and indigenous peoples, and we firmly condemned torture. It's very sad for me to know that at this date we have to pay homage to two martyrs in the fight for rights, those of Comrade Jose Bernardo Orlando de Silva and Rodrigo Celestino from the MST, who were assassinated last weekend in the Dom Jose Maria Paris Agrarian Reform Camp in Paraíba. I ask everyone to pay homage to these heroes of the Brazilian people and to struggle for human rights. They were victims of the same violent hate speech that reached Marielle and Anderson, Master Co de Cantande, and young Charlene Albuquerque, among many others who were so prosecuted and threatened. 8 months ago, I'm skipping ahead, 8 months ago, I was there at the Metal Workers Union, surrounded by affection and solidarity of thousands of comrades who are not satisfied with my arbitrary and unjust imprisonment. I want to say that I am still with you and thinking about the future of our people every day. Brazil and the world know that the Lava Jato persecutors, Sergio Moro and the 4th Regional Court, set up a judicial farce to prevent me from being elected president again in accordance with the wishes of a majority of voters. I was condemned for quote-unquote undeterminate acts, that is for nothing. They did not present any proof against me and threw out all evidence of my innocence. Today I'm sure that I sleep lighter with a calmer conscience than those who condemned me. I do not want any favors. I just want justice. I will not trade my dignity for freedom. And I am deeply grateful for the solidarity I receive every day from the people of Brazil and of other countries. I thank the comrades from the Lula Livre Vigil, those who send letters for me in Curitiba, those who hold protests, write petitions, and act on social networks demanding a fair trial to which I have a right. I am aware that even in the difficult conditions we experience, not only in Brazil but many countries, that the fight for the realization of human rights will continue. We will build world of peace and fraternity where everyone without exception has a right to a dignified life. Until we meet again, a hug from your companion, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. Please stay on this. Every single Democrat should be speaking on the Lula case as well as the broader crisis in Brazil and the region. And we're going to do now a brief little global update that will flow out of that. The Landless Movement in Brazil is a really important, landless rural workers movement focuses on issues of land redistribution and land concentration in Brazil, like coming out of every other essentially slave-based capitalist economy. There's a massive misallocation of resources. And this struggle continues in Brazil. And this struggle was in creative tension with the Workers' Party government. And now you have in the Bolsonaro regime a government that's going to try to criminalize the very act of this movement. And of course, also the same paramilitary forces at the nexus of things like the government, military, police, and drug cartels that assassinated city councilor and activist Marielle Franco. There's been no arrests in her case. That's almost a year out. And just a reminder of her case, she was an incredible activist and city councilor who rose from the favela as an Afro-Brazilian lesbian, did incredible work for basically to protect her communities from police violence. She and her driver were assassinated, and she was even shot in such a way that her face they couldn't have an open casket at her funeral. No arrests in that case. On the 8th of December, 2 activists from the Landless Workers Movement were assassinated inside the Dom, this is what Lula mentioned, Dom Jose Maria Pires Agrarian Reform Camp in Alejandria County in Paraíba, around 400 kilometers from João Pessoa. I know I'm butchering these names. This is from Brazil Wire. Witnesses say that the criminals entered the camp wearing masks and riddled the areas where the farmers were eating dinner with machine gun fire. The victims are Rodrigo Celestine Jose Orlando Bernardo de Silva, both camp coordinators, which suggests that the crimes were committed to intimidate people engaged in the struggle for land rights. 450 families live in the camp, and they are not, where they are exercising their constitutionally guaranteed right to farm on land that was abandoned and not used productively when they settled it. The official owner of the camp is the Santa Teresa Business Group. So, again, more things that we really need to be emphasizing to elected officials here and in terms of our solidarity. In India, local elections did not go well for Narendra Modi's BJP, Hindu Nationalist Party. The centrist, center-left, and center-right, and highly compromised in its own ways, Congress Party scored big wins in local elections. And there were setbacks in many key states, and local elections actually matter a lot in India. It's a system where local parties have a great deal of discretion over resource spending and in relation to the federal government. The Rahul Gandhi, part of the Gandhi family legacy and lineage, not the Mahatma Gandhi, the Nehru Gandhi family, who leads the party, definitely got a boost, and this is being registered as a hit for Modi and a stagnant economy and budget cuts. So we'll continue to monitor both of those things. Guys, anything you want to jump in on before we get to the Griscom Economic Minute? I just think it's like...
Oh, I had one thing.
Yeah,
it was another Brazil Wire. We'll tip 3 articles here.
Brazil Wire is great.
They posted a thing about, apparently there's some mystery about who's been writing the Guardian's Lula and or Dilma Rousseff headlines.
Really?
Yeah, they said they reached out to article and they said they don't know who is ultimately changing them. So
that's very bizarre. I have to say, in general, I've found the Guardian's Latin America coverage to be not good. And there's a huge, the coverage of Brazil has just been atrocious. And what you could see by how atrocious it's been is because there's been so much kickback that now you see some examples of just more neutral coverage of it and what that would actually look like. So you can see in like more recent articles, it's like not necessarily a pro-PT line, but just a sort of like broader acknowledgement of the full reality that's gone on there. And it's already a much, like, as an example, Dave Weigel had a piece about the global summit that Bernie organized, and he mentioned Haddad briefly in it. And the piece wasn't about Brazil, obviously, but he basically said Haddad stepped in for Lula, who was barred from running, which is a good example of like, that's a good way of just sort of like, if you want to play it 50-50, right? He didn't say why, he didn't offer a justification, and you can sort of like take it in the direction you want. And there was so little of that, that just like these breathless confirmations of corruption and so on and so forth, when we already know. I mean, the case was extraordinarily shabby. And also because we know how weak corruption narratives are, that's not going to get you the full picture anyways. Anti-corruption politics is the handmaiden of fascism. And you either need to deal with corruption as a whole, which will deal with capital as a whole, or don't worry about it that way. Because as I always say, look, the evidence against Lula is paltry. But I mean, if the payoff, if the arrangement is, you deal with a dirty political system and engineer it so that between 29 and 40 million people are lifted out of poverty and you end up with a modest condo, great.
Yeah, corruption.
I would say nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Corruption seems to be like trying to bifurcate different types of exploitation. Like there's the good exploitation and there's the bad exploitation.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Let's get to the Grisham, the GEM system, the Grisham Economic Minute, how to get condos with Marxism.
Yeah, well, talking about corruption, I wanted to talk about the way that financial global capital tries to subvert democracy. Specifically, I want to talk about what's going on in Mexico right now. Just early on into AMLO's presidency, AMLO in Mexico, as we know, was just elected with a huge mandate in Mexico. I mean, very much a reversal of the way that this country has been run for a long time. It's been very exciting for a lot of reasons. But as is typical, whenever we see these left-wing governments come into power, financial capital immediately hits. So what happens? As AMLO is rising in the polls, you start to see peso trading drop precipitously. So much so that, that there's all these questions. It's like, well, is this a leader good with the economy? Is this leader, somebody who can lead the Mexican economy out of its sort of stagnation that it's been in for the past few years? And I just wanted to hit a couple things that have been happening recently. First of all, I just want to remind everybody that Mexico has faced years of austerity. And Mexico, 44% of Mexicans are poor. And that's a huge amount of people. Mexico is a country around like 129 million people. So this is a significant amount of folks that we're talking about. And we've seen regime after regime be completely open to global capital coming into Mexico, privatizing public goods, and taking the natural resources from people. So now we have AMLO, who's introduced this new idea called the People's Poll. I don't know if folks have followed this, but what he's done is he's brought economic questions to the people of Mexico. So one of the most recent scandals was there was a $13 billion plan to build a new airport outside of Mexico City. AMLO held a People's Poll to ask if they want to spend the money on the new airport rather than just refurbishing the existing airport. 69.9% of people voted to repair the current airport rather than spend $13 billion on a new airport, which freaked the fuck out of the global capitalist class who had already bought bonds, had already invested, and already wanted to play this game. Well, AMLO says, that we're not going to do this, and has even said to the people who've put in money, we'll give you some money back so that you don't, lose all of your investment. Right. But of course, this has freaked out the entire, the entire class, capitalist class. We've seen just recently around $2.2 billion exit of government bonds from global investors, meaning that they're trying to punish AMLO. They're already trying to hit the Mexican economy in a way of a capital flight to push back against the democratic regime. And of course, when you read financial press results talk about Venezuela, is AMLO going to be the next dictator? And and they say, is there going to be an economic catastrophe? And even though there has not been any change into the actual production of Mexico or even its fundamentals. When they're talking about an economic catastrophe, what they're saying is AMLO is pushing back against a global consensus that has allowed the wealthy of the world to pillage the natural resources of Mexico with no democratic check or input. All AMLO has been doing has been giving the people who don't have the money an ability to have a democratic voice in their society. And we've seen more things that have been going on as AMLO has pushed back against more contracts being given out to oil resources in Mexico. So he put a 3-year moratorium on new contracts in Mexico. Of course, they're freaking out. And another big deal for these people who care so much about the world and care so much about democracy, was a member of AMLO's coalition put in a bill on the Mexican government to say any new mining rights that are given, contracts that are given in the country, will first need to consult with the indigenous peoples. Well, across the financial press, we're talking about how much this is going to cost, how much is this going to slow everything down. I mean, we're really seeing a significant fight that's going on in this country, which is not a small country economically and has been one of the most favorable of the emerging markets. We've seen the foreign investors leave. We've seen damage to the peso already. Undoubtedly a fight will come. And regardless of its success, we need to remember that there's an outsized power of finance and it attempts to thwart democracy at every chance that it gets. When they say that AMLO is a dictator, who really is the dictator? The elected representative of the people who ask the people what they want to do with their money and their own society, or the owners of capital from foreign countries who demand that there will be done regardless of the human, ecological, economic cost and the suffering that it creates? I have to say that watching what's been going on over the past couple of weeks in Mexico has been a very exciting thing, and I'm not sure if AMLO will be able to pull Mexico out of its problems. I'm not even sure if AMLO will do what is right, but we have to right now, when we see the foreign capital class prepared to pounce on this movement, we certainly need to be ready to support it and to make sure that we do not fall into lazy narratives talking about the stock market and the rate of the peso, because they're trying to tarnish it to make a point and to hurt him, to prevent him from enacting the democratic will of the Mexican people.
In this last weekend's illicit history for patrons, Quinn Slobodian and I talked about the misnomer that neoliberalism is a project of supporting organic markets. They don't exist. Everything is set by policy. The global rules of capitalism have been written in such a way that not only are they not following any type of moderate social democratic model, they have viciously and very determinedly and very strategically been written to favor a very narrow set of interests, which is why when you look at something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership as an example the Obama administration was pushing, it was about delivering a very narrow set of policy rules for a capital class and investors and intellectual property rights. That's what it was about. It was not about trade. So this is exactly what you're going to see coming with AMLO now, which is that, and as Matt Taibbi just walks in, I'll say that really obnoxious, disgusting phrase, the golden straitjacket that Thomas Friedman coined. That is exactly what he's stepping out of, and that is exactly what you're seeing the financial press, including ones that like to pose as enlightened financial press, try to snap him back into. So that's why, again, another very important exercise in solidarity. Let's just do a quick pitch. You can keep the BBC music for it. All right. Patreon.com/TMBS. We are very close now. Don't forget, when we get our next goal, which is 2,000 patrons, that terrifying food bucket challenge is going to happen. I think at 3,000 patrons, let's say push-up contest. Let's just do something fun. All right. Something a little healthier. At 5,000 patrons, well, that's going to be on you to remember what I promised to do for 5,000 patrons. But look, it's a whole parallel. You'll get at least over 100 additional episodes, illicit histories and primers, as well as all of the post games. Huge amount of extra content. Our YouTube channel, which you're here for, is humming. If you haven't yet, click that subscribe button. We're halfway sold out to the Bell House show, which means they're going to start picking up again fast in January. So go get your tickets at the Bell House for the Michael Brooks show with Bhaskar, Alona, T, and us. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with Matt Taibbi.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Crew, the inimitable Matt Taibbi.
How's it going, Michael?
It's going good. Thanks for being here, man.
Of course. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's start on a stupid and fun tip.
Okay.
All right. We've pulled up some sound of Steve King bitching about something.
Okay.
He's not bitching about immigrants. He's not bitching about...
He's bitching. Well, I don't know if Sundar
That's probably
Pichai
something
is he born in America? I don't know. If he wasn't, Steve King probably knows.
Yeah,
but-
I'm sure he knows. I'm sure that anybody's birth is known by Steve King. He's, of course, one of the most... He's a not hide the ball white supremacist. But he's also a guy who doesn't understand. So that's a good point. I'm sure he would know where this guy is born, but he does not know what this guy's company does exactly. He knows it's tech. He's talking with, who's the guy from Google?
I can't remember.
But it's a guy, he's talking to somebody from Google.
Oh, it's Microsoft, sorry.
Excuse me, he's talking to somebody from Microsoft. Okay, sorry. Always helps to set up being an asshole. Okay, this is the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai. Definitely would be shocked if he hasn't made an appearance in a Thomas Friedman column, speaking of which.
He probably has.
I'm sure he has. And here he is getting questioned by Steve King. And you'll probably notice something pretty quickly here.
I have a 7-year-old granddaughter who picked up her phone before the election, and she's playing a little game, kind of game a kid would play, and up on there pops a picture of her grandfather. And I'm not going to say into the record what kind of language was used around that picture of her grandfather.
Fuck Steve King.
Is it was Steve King as a racist?
Yeah, is it Steve King is your granddad's a fucking racist?
Which was used around that picture of her grandfather. But I'd ask you, how does that show up on a 7-year-old's iPhone who's playing a kid's game?
Congressman, iPhone is made by a different company, and so, you know, I mean...
It might have been an Android. It's just, it was a hand-me-down of some kind.
You know,
I'd ask...
I'm happy to follow up and understand the specifics. There may be an application which was being
Who's
used
that in the
which
back?
Had a notification, but I'm happy to understand it better
That's
and clarify
Facebook
it
stuff,
for you.
right?
Okay, thank you for your testimony and yield back.
That's a Facebook guy. That's a Facebook protest, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not a. You mean it's a? What do you mean a Facebook protest?
I thought the guys that they had dressed up like that were part of like the Facebook is the new like robber baron Monopoly thing.
It's a.
You're
I'll
talking
pull it
about
up
the guy
here.
with the mustache and the top hat. I think that's a Facebook thing. But I like though that his backup is first is like, why didn't you not make something happen on an iPhone? And then he's just like, well, we don't make iPhones. And he's like, yeah, it could have been.
It could have been an iPhone.
It could
Yeah,
have been another phone. It was
It could have been you who did it. Yeah.
It's like your flying carpet magic doesn't deceive me. Why did my granddaughter see that headline? You son of a bitch.
I saw Steve King once give the most jaw-dropping speech that I think I've probably ever watched in my career as a campaign reporter.
What was it?
I was in Rockwell City, Iowa, and he was with Huckabee, and
that's a good combo.
Yeah, and they were talking about gay marriage, and I forget what the name of the Supreme Court case is about that, but it had just happened.
No.
Oh, yeah, Bergerfeld, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he said, he essentially says to the crowd, that Supreme Court case means you can now marry your lawnmower. And I was in the back with all the reporters. I mean, we were all like, and everybody stopped. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, we all were hoping there was going to be Q&A so we could follow up, but there wasn't any, so we never got to. Basically, he interpreted the law to mean that you could basically marry anything.
Right.
And not just another.
You sure like lawnmower isn't just some like white nationalist slang for like Muslims or something like that?
That would have made more sense.
Guy can marry a lawnmower.
Yeah.
But that is amazing that he skipped, because the old like freak out homophobic line was the Santorum thing, that you can marry your dog.
Oh, right.
So he just skipped that.
He's just
like, we're just going straight inanimate objects.
Yeah, you got to keep it animate.
Yeah, it should be animate.
If you want to be homophobic properly.
Right. Yeah,
like
it's just sort of like non sequitur
homophobia.
homophobia.
Yeah. Very weird.
Do you remember the Tony Soprano in the? Remember that scene where he's like talking? He's talking to his therapist because essentially, like he's what he's actually talking to her about is murdering a guy because he's gay. Right?
Okay.
And he doesn't want to do it, but Phil Leotardo is a real hard on, and he's just like, and so he's basically gonna have to let it happen because it will implicate some garbage root or some shit. And he's like, part of me just wants to say salute, live and let live, right? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, but he has to convince himself. He's like, but it's like that Senator Sanatorium says, soon we'll be fucking dogs. Yeah, it's like that Senator Sanatorium says.
Outstanding.
Yeah, that was. Oh wait, it's Equifax.
No, it's a group called Public Citizen.
But they're protesting Equifax.
They did this in October of 2017. So this guy's been around a little bit. He appears in the background.
So he's just like.
So it's a monopoly over the justice system.
Yeah.
I got it.
So he appears like he has a monocle.
Yeah.
It's a good bit.
I like it.
That'd be a fun job. Just go to hearings dressed as a
very fun job.
That might end up being my job.
You should bring a monocle into the.
Yeah, I don't think you should go in such a. Yeah, you should just bring a monocle for all jobs.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I would hope that next time you come hang out with us, you'll have a monocle.
Hopefully.
There should be a podcast monocle service. Like, get your monocle at monocles.com.
Isn't there a magazine called Monocle that's like this sort of like incredibly pretentious, like,
and they bathe in it.
It's like Dwell magazine meets Foreign Policy. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who was behind that project, but I can't.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
This magazine is like, it's like they'll do like a piece on like how like the Swedish army brews coffee.
Like always watches.
Yeah, there's a lot of watches here. I feel like this was a thing that was very, like, it's amazing to me that it was either created after 2008 or that it survived 2008. Right? Like, like, how the fuck is this still happening?
Right. That's amazing.
And I remember when I was part of a group of people that were reading this probably in like 2011. And I think a big part of it was just like the shame at how poor we were. And then this idea that maybe there'll be some like translative property, like, and you could like, oh yeah, I'll get invited to an event at the embassy and like, then go home and not eat.
You know this guy Tyler Brule?
Yeah,
he's the
you
founder.
Know him, Matt?
No,
Tyler Brule is the founder.
He's
Monocle.
He's well appointed. Look at that outfit.
Is that well appointed by today's standards?
I think so.
Feels like
by Jack Dorsey's standards, it is.
Well, Jack Dorsey's on some Batman shit.
Yeah, is he? I don't even know.
Yeah, you want to see? Do we have the? You know what? We're gonna do the Jack Dorsey bit in the post game, but you don't have that picture. We got to show Matt that picture. So he just went to Burma and did a meditation retreat.
Okay.
And I know a lot of people actually because I've trained in this particular kind of mindfulness meditation that he did, Vipassana. And so I know people who've been going to Burma, like even when it was very closed. And there's a big debate and conversation there about like, should you go first because of the military dictatorship and now because of the genocide of the Rohingya? And he just like went, just like, who's fucking rad?
Wow.
Like even as there's like all of these reports coming out about like
the picture
social media complicity in genocide.
Yeah, that's right. That was there with the whole UN thing, but that was more about Facebook.
That was more, yeah.
I don't know if this is a picture. This is a picture I was talking about. Was it with Shinzo
Well, this
Abe.
is him in Japan, but
Yeah.
I don't know if he has a picture from Burma.
Oh
but
yeah,
this
I don't
is
know
a
if he's got
pretty
one from
rad
Burma.
picture.
Yeah.
That's a very Star Trek-y kind of look. I dig it.
Everything's under control on Twitter, guys.
Yeah,
I'm trying
Don't
to be.
worry about it.
I'm going to have a New Year's resolution, which is just to be positive all the time after the New Year. So I'm getting into the spirit of that. So I'm just trying to react positively to that look.
Could you press a pause button on that for the show?
For the show? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, just need a little bit of negativity, man.
Yeah, I know.
I actually think this is a pretty positive show, actually, for a left show.
It's.
I think
that was
what
not
do you
a
say,
ringing
Matt? No,
endorsement.
we're not positive.
I think there's a mixed bag.
Well, I think we can critique and mock people and still be positive. I think like the vibe of the show is positive.
Yeah. Like okay, sure.
I mean, it's not up with people, but
It's not up with certain people. It's down. It's up with most people. Down with the specific set of people.
Yeah, it's down with it, and we're jocular about it. It's like,
Oh,
it's like,
yeah.
fuck
The
you,
jocularity-
Macron. Like, yeah, we're not
jocularly down on people.
Exactly.
That's the name of the act.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
Jocular destruction.
We're not bummed about it. I'm not doing.
Yeah, we
I'm
are.
not doing Amy Goodman here.
No, yeah.
I mean, I love Amy Goodman, but that's
for
not
sure.
high tempo, right? It's like, and another news
In
in El
Myanmar
Salvador
today.
What I liked about what I
I'd like Amy Goodman roasting Jack's outfit, though. That'd be fun. What is he wearing? What's that T-shirt?
Meanwhile, Jack from Twitter has not aged out of puberty. In other news, the CEO of one of our most important social platforms has severe emotional disabilities. I'm Amy Goodman. I used to listen to Amy Goodman every day, like first thing in the morning, and I still do, but now I circuit break it. Like I get up and I exercise a little bit or meditate or something, because she'll also hit you with stuff that like isn't, and to very much to their credit, I think we do a little bit of this too, like things that are not even in the news cycle, but she'll just remind you. Like she'll be
Right,
like,
yeah.
like,
500 tons of radioactive water are still flowing
yeah,
out
like,
of the
right.
Fukushima.
As part of
Yeah.
bones that
Yeah.
were of murdered nuns
Right.
as part of the U.S. war in El Salvador.
Right.
Just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's a whole fucking world to live.
Well, hey, there's a lot of, I mean, I look on Project Censored like once every month or so just to make sure I don't forget about certain stories, you know. But
it's endless.
Problem is they don't really sell, so, you know, it's
That's where you need to bring in the politics of personal destruction of like key figures, like
Right.
Jordan Peterson or something.
Yeah, like Jordan Peterson or somebody like that. There's plenty of people to make fun of, and I think frankly that's a pretty positive attitude. How do we fix Facebook, Matt?
I don't know. I mean, this is such a weird subject. You know, I've been following this for like most of this year, and I've really had a hard time getting people interested in this particular angle of the story, because basically the arc of the whole Facebook thing for me was they brought it up in the context of Russiagate and all those ads, and all the platforms were hauled before the Senate last year, and they were told that they had to come up with a plan, or it was suggested to them that they come up with a plan for preventing the sowing of discord. And within 5 or 6 months, they were all in partnership with groups like the Atlantic Council, which is like a NATO organization.
Yeah.
And they were doing these little test runs of like zapping little sites, and then all of a sudden they started zapping real sites. I thought this would be a big media story, you know, like because some of these organizations had pretty decent sized followings. You know, there's a thing called Reverb Press, which you'll see a lot online, or Liberal America is another one. And they just disappeared. I'm like, some of them were libertarian, some of them were right wing, some of them were, like pro-democratic, and I think it's kind of a harbinger of how the media is going to be dealt with in the future. The sort of Alex Jones model of just sort of removing actors from platforms simultaneously. I don't know. Does that not scare anybody?
I think it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's why we've been on the like Facebook is not just lame, it's evil beat for a while, and it seems like okay, so you have this like big series of actual problems. First and foremost, that Facebook is basically just like this
vast data collection scheme.
Yeah, it's this vast data. That's the business model. One of the great sort of ironies of Facebook is if you watch the Facebook movie, which is okay, the big beef in that movie is between Zuckerberg and I don't remember one. I guess Maine was with the twins, but there's the guy.
Winklevi.
Yeah, but there's a guy that is his friend who he partners with.
Yeah.
And the guy's always like, okay, Mark, like we need to get advertising on the site. We need to make this something. And he has like the strategic vision that like, no, we're building something bigger than just sticking lame ads on it. But of course, what the movie doesn't get to is it was like, we're not going to stick lame ads on it because we're going to create a massive private surveillance system where the ads can be micro-targeted and sophisticated and absolutely invasive. So the reason we're not doing these little ad campaigns isn't because of some type of ethic or ethos. We're going to go for the real deep dive.
Yeah, they were the first, very early in their history, they did those ads that were sort of micro-targeted to college students, right? So I think they were like advertising things like the head of the Charles, like parties and things like that. But the whole idea was they used the data to match the ad to the people, and that's the business model now. Like instead of having to go on CBS and show an ad to everybody, now you can go to Facebook and say like, well, my target audience is 45-year-old right-wing Christians or something like that.
With erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, with erectile dysfunction.
Little negativity into it. So then, so if we were to say, like as a timeline, and Corey Pines talked about this a lot on this show too. He wrote this book, Live, Work, 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 Die, A Journey into the Savage Heart of Silicon Valley. And which I think you'd probably really like that book. But he went to Silicon Valley to become a billionaire. Just had like an adventure there. And Silicon Valley is just awful.
Unless you become a billionaire.
His point was that those days are over.
Oh, okay.
And people are still going there based off of this sort of like fake dream, essentially. And also that you couldn't really become a billionaire to begin with unless you went to Stanford. But like that, basically, through the Obama era, Silicon Valley is amassing all this power. They're violating people's privacy. They're building this sort of like stalker economy, and Democrats are essentially totally looking the other way because of campaign contributions and because, Silicon Valley is a sort of like new sort of acceptable place of capitalism for progressives and like the public mind. And then after 2016, Trump wins, and all of a sudden all of these people want to blame Facebook instead of their own political failings, basically.
Right.
And I feel like what you're identifying though is that in both of these scenarios, like there's the big picture questions of what happens when 45% of people say they're getting news from Facebook, and what happens when this company that has zero accountability knows everything about us. And you basically are saying, well, what they've done is they're just outsourcing censorship to essentially right-wing think tanks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think what they're doing is they're trading a lack of regulation for some political control over the content. And we've seen that in other countries, and this is why I spent a lot of time in this piece going into how they behave in Israel, how they behave in other parts of the world, that they will have either formal or informal relationships with governments to regulate content. And they previously, in the United States anyway, always had this kind of hands-off attitude about it, and everybody was fine with it as long as, Donald Trump wasn't winning the election.
Right.
In fact, if you remember, there were lots of stories after 2012 talking about how one of the reasons Obama won re-election is because they had such a skillful Facebook campaign. But the reverse happened this time around, and now it's not just Facebook. It's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify. They all seem to be. I mean, it's hard to report because you can't say definitively that they're acting in concert. They all denied to me that they were, but you keep seeing situations where a person or a media outlet will disappear from 3 or 4 of the platforms in the same couple of days, and that's troubling, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, even if it isn't even if they're not on a call together, I mean,
right,
you're setting a template.
Yeah,
and that, I mean, so is it? I mean, I guess being a socialist, I always just say, yeah, these platforms have major implications for speech and for journalism. And they're private platforms, so you can't do anything about it. So the way you have to do is you basically, I mean, I advocate just making them public utilities essentially, and then the First Amendment would protect them. Like, what is that? Does that make sense to you? What did the Europeans figure this out? Do they have some?
The Germans have a formal law that governs this. I mean, it's a little simpler over there because they have hate speech laws that they can just apply directly to. Right. And so they've kind of created a system. They've built these things they call deletion centers, which sounds really creepy to me.
It sounds so fucking creepy.
But yeah, no. The problem with all of these platforms is that they're essentially unregulated media regulators. They're non-transparent media regulators. Like you think about Google. It has an algorithm, and the way the algorithm works determines what order you see content in. Like, they've decided that they're going, like, for instance, the metaphor they used for me was, well, in the old days, if you entered baseball in your search engine, the local Little League team would come up. Now we've shifted the emphasis from specificity to authority, right? Or relevance to authority. So now instead of the local Little League team, you'll see MLB.com.
And that's a much more subjective, I mean, I get, MLB, sure, but relevancy feels like that's a more sort of, that's a less subjective metric.
Yeah, so the metric, they'll send you, they'll show you how the survey works. Basically, they're looking for things like, does the outlet have a lot of Pulitzer Prize awards, right? So the thing that really was stunning to me was the World Socialist website. It doesn't actually, no matter how you feel about it, they don't really have factual problems. They're very professionally run. It has a clear message. There's no fraud involved, right? So if you enter Trotsky or Trotskyism, you're more likely to get an article in the New York Times about Trotskyism than you are to get the leading Trotskyite website in the world. And that's a big change. Like they started.
And that's a big problem.
Yeah.
It's also not very authoritative.
Right. Yeah.
If I want to read about Trotskyites, I want to read them, not Barry fucking Weiss.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But it's a major sea change, and they just sort of did it in early 2017, and the problem with that is that they, when they make changes to their algorithm, nobody knows. They don't announce it. You don't know what the changes are, and it's impossible for media companies to really keep pace with changes if they don't know exactly what the metric is. So it's very difficult. I mean, I think it's a big issue, but
you see people, yeah. I mean, and so that was like I don't have, in the relative world we're in, which is a problem. I don't have any, like, cool, Alex Jones is hurt. That's great. Fuck Alex Jones. Whatever. I actually kind of miss doing content about him.
Yeah.
But it's a lot, actually. But I feel like, but it was just amazing how people totally missed this sort of bigger picture takeaway, which is like all of these platforms just gone.
Right.
And if you think, I guess this is always my argument to the left. It's like, the reason that I'm mostly very opposed to deplatforming, I have no problem with using it strategically, and I think there's fringe benefit. Like, there's a benefit to him being gone. But like, if you think that a line that starts with Alex Jones is going to go and encompass the right and not quickly pivot to
Black Lives Matter,
Black
or
Lives Matter,
yeah.
to, well, or I mean, I feel like even on this show, right? We've done content like with real journalists, real filmmakers on the CIA crack connection in the 80s. That's a real story.
Yeah.
The DEA and El Chapo is a real story. It's a real enough story that they're literally keeping it out of court proceedings right now as we speak. And also heroin in Afghanistan. But if you just have like that sounds weird. What do you mean? Government and drugs. That sounds like Alex Jones type thing. And if your vetters are staffed up center-right establishment think tanks, you think that they're going to be curious about, covering that type of story or supporting people's right to cover it rigorously? I mean, of course not.
No. And it's just frustrating because people can't see around the corner to the logical next step with all this. We just so carefully built up over decades a system for dealing with bad speech that was intentionally slow. The bar was intentionally really high. There's a reason why it's really hard to get successfully sued for libel. Like the courts are really specific. Like we want people to not self-censor, right? Because we want to encourage them to have dialogues about things. So if they're afraid,
we want Trump and Ivanka jokes.
Yeah, exactly.
Want them. I'm here to provide them.
That's what you're gonna do. Exactly.
Positive energy.
Well, this is like the asymmetry on the right? Like,
yes,
because they can play this game, and if they get the leftist banned, then that's good for them. And if they don't get the leftist banned, then they can say, well, why do you ban them or why don't you ban them when you ban us?
And look at it from like, let's bring in the Gramscian like hegemony, right? Because they also can sacrifice, like, at the end of the day, even if the Mercers or whoever else is chipping some money for somebody like Milo, doesn't matter. Like, it could be useful for 6 months and then he self-emulates and it's gone. And the broader infrastructure of funding right-wing think tanks, right-wing personalities, there's always going to be an endless flow of money and an endless home field advantage for those people.
Mm-hmm.
So, they can both play it both ways you're talking about. And they also can essentially just like fund AstroTurf journalism, which can go too far in individual cases and then get pulled off of the field. Whereas, like, I mean, another example for this show, I know Brazil Wire, which we used, because I'm very serious about what's happening in Brazil and the Bolsonaro and the Lula case and the landless people's murders. They're like an indispensable English language source, and they are absolutely punished by Facebook's algorithms. And I mean, you're going to tell me that people in the Atlantic Council haven't. That's so obvious. Like,
or
who wants to favor that?
Or Telesaur.
Telesaur has been punished. Exactly.
Yeah, they've been yanked a bunch of times from a bunch of platforms. There was one this week that was really weird. Which there's this thing on Twitter. It's Optisanitize, which is it's a site that is pretty much dedicated to showing footage of war crimes in Yemen.
Right.
And
we've retweeted some of their stuff. That's just trying to bring the fact that we are enabling mass murder there every day to public attention.
Yeah. So they got yanked. And there was a little bit, they got yanked once, then people complained, they got reinstated, then they got yanked again, and now that's it. And so this is what's going to, this is what drives me crazy. This is what's going to be the future now is there's going to be almost no way for anybody who's an alternative news outlet that has any kind of slightly, controversial opinion to navigate itself to a wider audience, because there's going to be a fear of getting zapped, because of this dueling tattletale problem. Like the right is going to be trying to get
tattletale problem.
Well, that's what it is.
That's exactly what it is. That's perfect.
You're
This is
gonna
a tattletale society. It needs to stop.
It's crazy. There's mass reporting on the right and there's mass reporting on the left, and then people get taken off. Then they get a demerit, which.
But what is the But see, that's the bigger problem in the culture right now, and it's a bigger problem on the left because, as I say, practically there's all these inbuilt advantages on the right. Like, I remember this story that Douglas Lane was telling me about his son going to these really important demonstrations at the University of Oregon against tuition hikes, and the students got in really serious trouble. I think some of them were almost on the border of being expelled for these protests. And then in this total non sequitur, their answer was, well, you have these like pro-life demonstrators also disrupting things. Why aren't they also getting in trouble?
Right.
Versus, are you fucking kidding me? We're going to be out tomorrow double the size to lower the tuition hikes and protest that you're threatening our speech.
Right.
Sure, of course, I'm pro-choice, of course, but that's not like that bizarre, like, instead of taking on the structure, well, why don't they get that? It's so fucking weird how that's disseminated. And it's never going to win on our side because they have the resources for that kind of petty bullshit.
Yeah.
You see it a lot on Twitter now too, especially with leftists. It's like very much they're always trying to get Twitter to ban certain accounts.
I don't want them to be banned. I want them to be exposed and embarrassed.
More often than not, the Twitter will ban left-wing people just for like defending themselves from like horrible misogynist attacks or something. They curse or whatever at them and they'll pull their account.
Right.
And it's one of those things. Is like, why are we celebrating Twitter, this private company, this small group of individuals, pulling people off of a platform that is so influential for a lot of people now? I mean, that's the real deal here. Is like you have Facebook and Twitter. They really have become such a central point of communication and development, and like that's how most people get their news. And they've taken that power, and now we're seeing this complete destruction of of that open space. And what's everyone doing? They're all returning. Now they're being forced to return to the New York Times, MSNBC, all these outlets that were thoroughly discredited over the past 15, 20 years.
Right.
That's why people were looking for alternative. That's why people were on Twitter and Facebook, was to get different sources of information. And now they've returned it back to them. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, right. That's exactly the point. Like these sort of smaller outlets, they're there for a very specific reason. They wouldn't exist if the normal news outlets were doing a better job. And they grew up, especially. I don't think it's an accident that there was a real explosion of them after the WMD thing. People stopped trusting the New York Times, all those outlets.
Well, we were talking about the Ezra Klein thing today, and the Ezra Klein Paul Ryan, and I was looking at those old,
sort of facilitating Paul Ryan.
Yeah, and looking at a 2010 blog post of Ezra saying people are calling me out for giving this guy the benefit of the doubt, but come on, look at these charts. And the top comment that was published 13 minutes after Ezra Klein posted that was, Yeah, he's not arguing in good faith, you idiot. Like, and
now Ezra Klein sees that like 8 years later.
Yeah, basically, but I think of, like, that's why I stopped reading Wonk blog, right? It's those sorts of things where it's like, what the fuck is this?
Right, and if you open up the terrain, there's going to be people who are going to tell you, no, Paul Ryan is full of shit, and I'll explain why and not use polite language. And there's going to be people who say that the frogs are gay.
Right.
That's that's literally what having an open society is.
Well, I mean, the internet is full of all kinds of weird shit. I mean, there's Bigfoot sites, there's Scientology,
that's it.
The reason it was interesting and, a little messed up too. I mean, the porn aspect, whatever, but the ability for people to be able to reach each other on, these weird subcultures all around the world and to build up, sort of smaller readerships around specific issues, all that stuff's great. That was a great feature of the internet. And what they're going to do with this is they're going to homogenize it, and they're going to incentivize everybody to self-censor and to behave a certain way because they're not going to want to lose their businesses. Like, a lot of these people have invested a lot of money in this. And, I talk to people who spent $300,000 and $400,000 on boosting tools on Facebook. Like, if they get zapped, that's it. They're lost their life savings.
And these platforms are always lying about their metrics anyways. They have no transparency, and people have literally like a couple years ago, I mean, you mentioned in the piece, but like everybody's like, I know video, got to do video. And then Facebook was like, yeah, we were lying.
Yeah, exactly.
We
aborted
the whole
that
like
idea.
video model, that was just a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Cheryl had this idea to lie on her way
Sorry
to
for the
copy.
Sorry for the copy editors you laid off in the meantime.
Yeah, sorry about that. Mark will be meeting a cow later if you're interested. Maybe you should post about that. Keep it positive.
Yeah, no, it's scary.
Can you real quick then on actually a similar vein, and I'll just editorialize. I think Julian Assange is, unfortunately, he's trash, and I've thought he's trash for a long time, and it's a shame because obviously when I first became aware of WikiLeaks, they were, exposing civilian murder in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that's awesome, and I have a lot of sympathy for that project, but he sucks in an innumerable amount of ways. That's just what I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the case against him has nothing to do with him being a trash person or not. And it's another
Probably
thing
not.
that
We don't know.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But what is the sort of what is the state of that? And is this, I guess my point is to try to just draw the circle. Is this another thing of like, sure, whatever, fuck Julian Assange. But is this another one where the potentiality of the case they would bring against him has much bigger implications than just this guy?
So I think so.
Yeah.
I go back and forth about Assange. I know people who know him, and I hear, obviously, nobody who does what he set out to do early is going to be an ordinary run-of-the-mill person.
Right.
They're going to have some things going on with their personality, and also if you've essentially been incarcerated for a long time, you'll start to develop some feelings about things, and I can, in a way, understand some of the ways he's reacted. I don't totally understand the circumstances, but the legal implications of what a case against him would mean are so massive and like awe-inspiring that. It's just, again, it boggles my mind that the press is not interested in this, because if what most people think is going to happen happens, and the case ends up being something like espionage or conspiracy to commit espionage, and the predicate act is essentially convincing somebody to leak something.
That's all journalism.
Yeah, that would, and the penalties, we're talking like 40 and 50 years in prison, right? So
that's so insane.
So, we've already seen, like, the Obama administration tried to go after a couple of people in the last, before Trump got elected. They went pretty aggressively after a lot of leakers using the Espionage Act. and all those leakers work with journalists. So I think they did 8 cases involving the Espionage Act and leakers. They had an unindicted co-conspirator who was a Fox News reporter in one of them. There was another case that kind of involved James Risen.
I remember that
from the New York Times. I think would rattled him quite a bit. They were trying to pressure him to give up his source and all that stuff. But again, if they have a case that defines that activity as espionage or theft or conspiracy to commit theft, that would just radically change the business, like on every level.
In a way, like, I agree that Assange is obviously a complicated person, and I do have very strong criticism of him, but I almost want to go so hard out of the gate because I just want to, like, immediately stop the conversation from being about him. Because I just think that case and the implications of it are really, like, I mean, honestly, it could be anybody. That's just incredibly dangerous, period.
And that's the genius of it from the PR point of view, right. Is, people, they just can't get past, in almost any case, they can't get past who the defendant is, what the individual story is. They can't see around it to the legal precedent what that is. I mean, the Alex Jones thing was a little bit similar, although that's not a legal case. It's just an incident. But this would be way worse because we're talking about criminal penalties that are enormous. I mean, we're not talking about a fine or the threat of libel, because the way we deal with speech now, we punish the speech, we don't punish the person, right? Like if you have if you get punished for libel, you have to remunerate the victim, it gets taken off there's a correction, et cetera, but we've never taken the person away and put him or her in jail for publishing something. I mean,
because my understanding is that the Obama administration was really bad on this, and people said crazy things about Assange. Like, again, very critical of Julian Assange, calling him a digital terrorist for releasing information on U.S. civilian casualties and spying, as Joe Biden did, is a crazy authoritarian comment. But they never actually did this.
No.
They actually stepped back from it. So even by their standards, which are pretty expansive, they didn't go this far.
They didn't, although we don't exactly know what would have happened if he had stepped outside that embassy either.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, there are no guarantees. I think we're going to find out pretty soon.
Yeah, I think Lenin Moreno is his name. That's a very different dude that's in charge of Ecuador.
Yeah, and that's
a very different politics.
And this all has to do with, there's an aid package, where we have a new security arrangement with Ecuador.
Yep.
So there's no way we can have that with them and have Julian Assange in that embassy. They're just not going to tolerate that. So they're going to have to give him up at some point. And the question is, like, what exactly is going to happen when he walks out there? And again, people are so mad about 2016, and they've read so much, and I totally understand that, but boy, it would be a crazy world to live in if publishing a leak put you in jeopardy. You might have to leave the country for the rest of your life, like Snowden.
Right. That's insane.
Yeah,
it's insane. And I mean, and it's a funny strategic miscalculation he made, but I see that because I've been, I haven't talked about it enough, but Glenn Greenwald wrote a really good piece on this that kind of summarized everything, and people have all sorts of issues with him too, but he's another person that's like, I get it, actually, but he's an incredible journalist, and we're going to need to keep focusing on the bigger picture here. And the response was always like, it was like any various number of things, of trash things that Julian Assange may or may not have done.
Right.
In terms of how closely he coordinated with the Russians and all of this stuff. And it's like, it's not the point. It's it's irrelevant.
There's this whole thing in the culture now where they sort of build up an ick factor around people just by relentlessly throwing out information about certain people. And what ends up happening is people shy away from that person online. They don't feel, you feel reluctant to defend somebody. And next thing you know, everybody's sort of piling on. And the Assange thing is it's an incredibly complicated legal case that would have profound implications for everybody, but we can't have a rational discussion about it because the instant you do, people are like, well, you're defending Julian Assange, and it's just not like that.
Yeah, I'm defending journalism.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
The ability to practice journalism, which is a positive thing.
Yeah, no, I mean,
in
it's
keeping with the positive ethos of this show.
That's right, we're being positive.
That was such a positive bow to tie.
Dude,
That's like,
it's fucking positive, bro. I feel like I'm very positive. I'm fucking listening to
You've
Ram Dass
got
on my
this,
podcast.
the mindfulness thing is good. It's working.
Yeah, the
You can-
mindfulness thing. I mean,
you can say anything as long as you affirm like that was positive what we just did there.
that's why do you reveal? That's like showing them the game. No, I mean a lot of stuff is on an energy level.
You got to exude positive energy.
I kind of mean that though. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to the post game. Matt's gonna hang out with us a little bit longer. We're not gonna keep you too late, mess up the travel plans, because we will. What happens is we suck guests into this positive vortex on the show. We're going to go into the post game. We got to talk about drafting Bernie. We're going to play a little bit of sound. This Trump altercation with Nancy Pelosi was pretty funny. And then I want to play this clip of Meek Mill talking about Michael Smerconish. That's one person I like a lot, and another person I don't like as much. One person I have very positive feelings about, another person not so positive.
Okay.
But I think it will be good for you to touch on in light of your new Eric Garner reporting, maybe. So we'll do that, plus a bunch more in the postgame. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thank you as we near our first 2,000 goal. Appreciate you guys. Get your tickets to the Bell House show February 1st today with the crew, Alona Minkowski, Bhaskar Sunkara, Trevor Beaulieu from Champagne Sharks. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel. This Sunday, Liz Brunig on Beto O'Rourke, a user's manual. That's going to be for the illicit history. Thanks, everybody.